is ABC-7 Extra.
Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. I'm your host, Dylan McKim. For the next half hour, we are taking a deep dive into the Texas House of Representatives Investigative Committee report on the shooting at Robb Elementary School. We will talk with El Paso State Representative Joe Moody, who was one of the 3 members on that committee who authored the report. The report is 77 pages long. It's believed to be the most complete telling to date of the events of and leading to the tragedy on May 24th, when 19 kids and 2 teachers were killed by a gunman in their classroom. Here's the latest from Uvalde. On July 12th, video from inside Robb Elementary during the May 24th mass shooting leaked to Austin ABC affiliate KVUE and the Austin American-Statesman. It's the first time the public is able to see a portion of the police response to that shooting, which has been called into question. The video shows police waited over an hour from when they entered the school to when they killed the gunman. Victims left inside those classrooms waiting. El Paso State Representative Joe Moody, who was on a state committee investigating the shooting, tweets out that same day the report he is working on provides more context to the video, saying people deserve the complete truth. 5 days later, that report given to the families of the victims in a private meeting and then released to the public. 77 pages long, the report covers an overview of the school security, background on the attacker, and the response from law enforcement. That report finding systemic failures and egregious poor decision-making.
Shots fired! Get inside!
And body cam footage from officers on scene released. It shows the lack of urgency and confusion among law enforcement.
What are we doing here?
The same day the report is released, the acting city police chief on the day of the shooting, Lieutenant Mariana Pargas, placed on administrative leave. And now, parents of the victims calling for the school board to fire school police chief Pete Arredondo.
If he's not fired by noon tomorrow, then I want your resignation and every single one of you board members, because y'all do not give a damn about our children or us. Stand with us or against us, because we ain't going nowhere.
And joining me now is Representative Joe Moody. Mr. Moody, thank you very much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Let's go ahead and start with how the investigation was structured. Take me through who you talked to, how many people you talked to, who they were, and how did you conduct these interviews?
So we were, our first meeting, we met with the Department of Public Safety. We're given a broad overview of the investigation up to that point. It was at that point we asked for their entire investigative file, which was provided to us. Actually took a little bit longer than I would have liked to, but they got us their entire investigative file, which was roughly 48,000 records. That includes all the interviews that they conducted, all the body cams that you're starting to see, and then some autopsy records, statements, all the above was in that file that we had to review. We conducted 35 witness interviews on our own. We conducted those in executive session. Our belief, and we do have the ability to do that as an investigative committee, our belief is that there's candor you will get in executive session you might not get otherwise. Also, there were people that we spoke to who had suffered a large trauma, teachers in that classroom or in that hallway, who I think deserved some privacy also in this process. So candor and privacy kind of led to us doing it that way. We also had our own investigators that we hired with our committee that went out and canvassed and took statements from other witnesses that we didn't interview in person. But that was kind of the structure by which we operated.
Was there any information from agencies that you didn't get, or maybe testimony you didn't get to hear?
We did not have access to federal agents. They did give statements to DPS, so we did have the ability to review the statements they gave, but to be able to interview them or question them live was something we were not able to do. They certainly don't have to being federal officers and agents don't have to comply with a state committee.
The report talks about the school's communications and lockdown alerts and a culture of not locking doors. What were some of the failures you saw with how the school was set up with their communications, their security?
Well, I think there were certainly different levels of noncompliance. When I met with the teachers, part of the message I wanted to impart to them, we met with them as witnesses, and then I did meet with them again on Sunday before the release of the report, letting them know that this is not an attempt to lay blame on any one of them. I believe that the system that we have in place is one that doesn't recognize the reality of educators and what they face on a day-to-day basis. So that's on us to ask them to do things. If we ask them to do things in a way that doesn't reflect their reality, then that is a breakdown. One of the teachers shared with me, had I done everything start to finish by the book, I could have been in a place that it could have turned very deadly for me and my children. And so, when you hear that and when you know what they did on that day, you understand it wasn't the actions they took. It was the way that we asked them to react to those situations. So we need to have a wholesale look at the way we do that. The security system they had there, because of Wi-Fi problems, was not received uniformly throughout the school. That certainly was a problem. There was also, I believe, the report makes reference to something called bailouts. Now, this is kind of an immigration-related incidents in which there's a chase, and then multiple individuals will bail out of a vehicle and scatter as part of that. And between February and May, there were 47 of those incidents in the area. And so there was, depending on the proximity of those, the alert level was different for certain campuses. But that alert usually came from the outside in, right? The campus would have no reason to know about any of those things going on outside the campus. But in those instances, they would get alerted by the police outside that something was going on, and either to be, go on with instruction but secure your classroom, or to be in lockdown. And in this instance, when there was actually shots fired, no communication came from the outside of the school in. All of the communication came from the school out. It was a school coach that ultimately makes the alert on campus first. And so that system, although set up to create a quick uniform reaction, did not perform under this in these circumstances.
You talked about a lack of compliance and locking doors. Do you fear that there are a lot of schools in the state of Texas that have those same compliance issues? Should this report almost be required reading for school districts?
I hope so. I mean, I really do hope that districts and their administration will review, at a minimum, I would hope they would review 2 sections in this report, and that would be the one related to school security. Not that there's something, not that they're not involved in school security conversations, but to put this lens over their eye as we go into a new school year. I know that we're going to reach out here locally to all our superintendents to make that ask of them. The other section I think would be important for them to review would be the one about the attacker himself. While he was largely truant and absent from the school system, and so didn't present a lot of opportunities to interact with them later in his, it's particularly in his high school career, I think there are still some lessons to learn about his behavior and what he was doing, and things that they can maybe put in place to identify issues like that.
Let's talk about the police response now. The school district's active shooter policy says the school police chief will be the incident commander in the event of an active shooter. Now, Chief Pete Arredondo, he was one of the first people on scene, yet he tells the committee that he didn't see himself as the incident commander. When you talk with him with his interview, did he know the policy? Did he explain why he didn't assume that role?
I mean, he certainly knew the policy. We showed him the policy. He understood that that's what it said, and he was part of the effort to draft that policy. Whether he recognized himself in that position or not is, something I'll never know. I can't climb inside of his head, but I can watch the actions that day and commands given, and certainly in the hallway had a tactical command. And should have, and one of the decision-making points that we flesh out quite a bit in the report is there's never an attempt to create a detached incident command, and there is a purpose to having one, and it's because when you're in close to the incident, close to the scene, as Chief Arredondo was, there's a different focus. Right? You're not maybe gathering the information you need to be gathering and digesting it the way you need to. A detached incident command is able to do that, and that's why it's important in these situations. He never established that. There was no attempt for anybody that anybody else made to establish one either. And so that is one of the major failings, because you cannot you cannot produce the best results possible if you deprive yourself of the most accurate information. And officers that we spoke to used the word chaos, used the word confusion, used the word cluster. And I think the videos that people are seeing now publicly certainly show that as well.
Now, the report also really sheds light that no other law enforcement agency there really tried to offer any help or really assert themselves. Did you get a chance to talk to any other officers that were not local law enforcement that were there on the scene and ask them, maybe why didn't you become more assertive?
We certainly talked to people from other agencies, most local, but we did speak to folks from DPS. What I do want to state before the conversation, kind of drilling down into what happened in that hallway. There has been much made about 300, plus officers. I've seen people kind of use hyperbole around this is more than that we're at the Alamo. I think it needs to be understood that hundreds of those, most of those officers are nowhere near the hallway.
Right.
They're not all stacked up in the hallway. They're not all receiving the same information. In fact, many of those officers have received no information or misinformation, and have been essentially relegated to the perimeter. This is a very tight neighborhood. Many of them are parked blocks away coming on. So there's many of these, and I think it's important to note, many of these officers and those in law enforcement have no information that they could act upon.
Yeah.
However, I think there's probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 36 that are right in the proximity of the school, and those are the folks we need to be concerned about in what they did, when they did it, what they knew, when they knew it, and actions they could have taken. Because when we talk to an expert on these situations out of the Houston Police Department, they said it is incumbent upon someone coming onto a scene like that to identify incident command, and if there is not one, to work to establish one. And that never happens. And I think it could be easy for us to point our finger at one person or one thing, but that rejects the bigger problem. And I don't think that's a safe way to do things.
There was a storyline in this report that really stuck out to me. You're talking about a special agent with DPS. He arrived on scene. He starts clearing rooms as he gets there. He gets to a bathroom. He finds a young boy who locked himself in the stall. The boy had lifted his feet up on the toilet so that no one could see underneath. And when law enforcement, the agent, tried to get him out, the boy demanded he prove that he was with law enforcement. That boy was trained for active shooter events. He was trained to do that, to hide, to ask questions. But it appears in this report that the adults in the situation, those law enforcement sworn to protect, did not follow their training. That really sticks out to me. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, I think it's hard to not come to that conclusion. We talked a little bit about teachers earlier and maybe how they didn't have compliance with some of the particulars of security protocol, but in those moments of what they were supposed to do in an active shooter drill, they acted more heroically than most in this story, and I think that needs to be mentioned. It is to me it is hard to watch this time and time again and not get a better outcome. You know the way it's going to end, and you just wonder why, given the training, right? You know that in 99.9% of cases, law enforcement training is officer safety, officer safety, officer safety. Make sure you get home at the end of the night, and that makes sense in most circumstances. Their training, specifically in active shooter situation, is to stop the killing, stop the dying, and regard for their own personal safety is supposed to be secondary. That's unnatural. As a human being, I think that is unnatural, but it is what they are trained to do and what we ask for them to do in those instances. That trooper that made that security and was sweeping through those rooms, who did that, without certain equipment, he has a military background, right? There's a difference between the approach that military takes and law enforcement takes. So you can actually see his training in that world kind of lend itself to the way that he acted in that hallway too. I think if more people had been proactive as proactive as he was, maybe it could have had a different result.
In your opinion, do you think there should be any legal action taken against any officers that were involved in this?
My understanding is that there's an investigation ongoing at the local district attorney's office, so I'll let those processes play out. I can't speak to any other litigation. Certainly not my role. Our role is to lay the facts out as we found them, and then hopefully stop the paralysis around fact finding. And now let's move forward to where we can go next.
Okay, we'll take a quick break right now. When we return, we will take a look into the background of the attacker. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. We'll be right back.
Hey, El Paso, your future is calling. It's time to imagine what's possible and dream big. We are ready to create a new path forward, helping you reach your goals and potential. Your passion is our purpose. Let's rise together.
With Honda, every summer adventure is the destination. Take your adventures farther with Honda, America's most fuel-efficient, full-line automaker. Hurry into a local Honda dealer where new vehicles are arriving daily.
One of the biggest fears that we see from so many folks is, have we done a good enough job financially as we go on through the retirement years? I think retirement should look like, every day being a Saturday. We want to have freedom to go do the things that we can do, and we're going to help you understand the tools that will help you accomplish what you want to accomplish. And what I get out of that is such an incredible fulfillment of being able to help you get to where you want to be.
Great news! Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso is expanding. That's right, construction's a must, so please pardon our dust while we prepare a bigger, better, state-of-the-art showroom and service experience for you. We're open during construction and fully stocked with the vehicles you love at prices you'll love even more. Like Elantras, Tucson, Santa Fe, Santa Cruzes, and even Palisades. All available with zero down. That's zero cash out of pocket. And interest rates as low as 2.79% APR for 60 months. Only at Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso.
Hey, El Paso, your future is calling. It's time to imagine what's possible and dream big. We are ready to create a new path forward, helping you reach your goals and potential. Your passion is our purpose. Let's rise together.
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. I'm still joined by Representative Joe Moody, and we're taking a deep dive into the Uvalde school shooting report. I want to talk about the background of the attacker. We actually have a slide I want to show our viewers, some red flags that came up about this attacker when he was growing up. Friends teased him. They called him a school shooter. He tried to get family members to buy him guns before he was 18, illegally through straw purchases. He told social media contacts about his guns, suggesting he would do something they would hear about in the news. Put simply, could this shooting have been avoided?
I think there were several places where things could have been reported along the path. It is, much as we talked about before, where you'd like to see a different response in the hallway from law enforcement. When you read these facts, and we were given cell phone records, internet search history, phone dumps from the attacker, so we really could unpack what he was going through in the time leading up to this tragedy. And you see multiple opportunities for someone to have said something when they saw something but didn't. I think the other fact that has crystallized for me is our weapons laws as it relates to purchasing these worked, but they were insufficient. Right? They worked up until he was 18, until the legal impediment was removed. Made multiple attempts to acquire these weapons and wasn't able to. And I believe if that law were 21, he would have continued to have been frustrated and run into that barrier, which gives you more time to identify someone who's having these issues. And so this is one of those examples where you can say the law worked, but it wasn't good enough.
There needs to be a change to the law. I mean, he bought 2 AR-15 style rifles, 60 magazines, over 2,000 rounds of ammunition. Would a change here, you think, in your eyes, be maybe just increasing that age to 21 could have helped in this situation?
I think that's one of the things that certainly could have changed. We also have some reporting requirements when someone makes multiple purchases. Right now, most of those are restricted to handguns, and so local sheriff doesn't get an update on weapons like this, but they would if someone purchased a couple handguns. I mean, look, we monitor how much Sudafed people are buying because we don't want them, making drugs out of it or putting it on the black market. Why would we not, at a minimum, if you don't want to restrict these, at least understand what's going on? Because the fact that someone buying 60 magazines, this is more than any soldier would carry into a war zone. That should have been something known. When I asked one of the officers who testified before us his thoughts on someone that purchased 60 magazines, I asked him if he had an AR-style rifle. He did. I asked him how many magazines he said he had. He said 3. I said, what do you think about someone that purchases 60? He said, that is someone that doesn't intend to stop shooting. There's no other factual conclusion. No one needs that. No one needs that. And so the fact that that isn't monitored, at least alerted to somewhere, to me is another piece of the puzzle that we have to figure out. Did you get a chance to speak with any family or friends of the attacker? We did. We spoke with both family and some people who had knowledge of him. Certainly wasn't reflective of what they knew of him. Okay. They talked about his background in school. We did learn of that he made certain suicidal comments to a family member. I think it's outlined in the report. This is happening contemporaneously with purchasing weapons. Now, it's for us looking at that outside, from the outside, you would say someone having suicidal ideation at the same time as acquiring weapons, that needs to be raised. There's something. There's a problem here. Yeah. It wasn't raised in this instance, and I can't put myself in the shoes of those family members. I'm sure that they have their own. They're going to work through this in their own way. But that's something that should have stood out in my mind and should have been reported as well. Was there at all a possible motive found in your investigation? A lot of people want to know, why did this attacker do this heinous act? And I think that's one of the questions we always ask ourselves. Why? Why did this happen? Certainly this is someone that was increasingly isolated. This is someone who, in my estimation, and I'm certainly not a medical expert, but I think had an emerging severe mental illness and a violent one at that. Certainly targeted a certain classroom. That was a classroom that he attended 4th grade in. And also he was infatuated with fame and notoriety. He wanted to be famous. And that was part of this as well. And you find that in other cases like this, which is why we did find it very disturbing that when the hallway footage was released, they included an image of the attacker. I think that was gave him the notoriety. I think that was reckless, and I've said as much. When we were going to release it, we would not have included his image. And you can get a clear view of police response without looking at him, and without providing his image to copycats who are going to lionize and glorify him. And I would ask, and we've made a very conscious choice in this report not to include his image, not to include his name. We refer to him generically as the attacker, and I think that's important. It's what I would ask for anybody discussing this going forward. Deprive him of that fame and notoriety. Deprive others of the opportunity to glorify him, to lionize him, because it is dangerous to do that. He himself searched for these types of stories and images when he was thinking about doing this. So make no mistake about it. The next school shooter will be looking at these images too. So we need to be very responsible with that. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back with more from Joe Moody and this report. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Stay with us.
A thin painted line. The only thing between you and a life-changing accident. But are these lines enough? A Subaru with eyesight watches the lines for any danger. And can automatically stop itself.
Is everyone okay? I'm okay.
Your family is safer in a 3-row Subaru Ascent. Love. It's what makes Subaru, Subaru.
The New Mexico Supreme Court affirmed a $165 million jury verdict against FedEx for a highway crash.
We've gone to trial against FedEx. The offer was minimal, and we ended up with one of the largest verdicts in the nation that year. Every client of ours deserves their day in court if they want it.
We got one of the largest verdicts in the state of New Mexico, and we've consistently had the largest verdicts in our area. There's nothing scary about taking on anybody. I'm not afraid of them.
We're a trial firm. That's what we do.
A good education is key for every child, and ESC 19 Head Start is the best place for children to begin. Head Start is El Paso's premier preschool program for expectant mothers and children from birth to 4 years old. Our full range of services support early learning and development in high-quality educational environments. We also help parents with their educational and career goals with classes, training, and community resources. Call or visit us online to register today.
This glorious Whataburger is yours. A few minutes ago, it didn't even exist. Why? Because every Whataburger is 100% fresh beef and made to order. That means we didn't start cooking it until this exact moment, right here, when you ordered it into existence. Whataburger, just like you like it.
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. I'm still here with Representative Joe Moody, and we are digging into the investigation report on the school shooting in Uvalde. Now, this report was released to the families of the victims first in a private meeting. I'm curious, what kind of questions did they have for you?
I certainly want to be respectful of them and their privacy. There certainly were some factual questions they were curious about that we went into and tried to answer any of those. I will tell you the two largest takeaways for me when I walked out of that room and were the word accountability. They want accountability. And I don't think they meant solely for those who failed on that day. I think they meant of people like me and of policymakers. They want accountability. And the last thought that was passed to me before I walked out of that room, and it's one that will never leave me, is to not to have let their children die for nothing. And I made the same commitment to them that I made to the folks here in El Paso nearly 3 years ago, which was I would never stop working on these issues to create a safer community, a more loving community, and those are those people in that room. I will work to give them a louder voice in Austin, much like I try to do for the community here in El Paso.
This was a fact-finding committee. There are no policy proposals in this report. But do you think there is policy that can address some of the failures or problems that we did see come out in this report?
Absolutely, and I think that's an important note to make. We were tasked with finding the facts. And so much of what we see in society today, in politics in particular, we all start with an answer and we don't care about the facts. This whole investigation was full of misinformation or half-truths or out-of-context pieces, and I believe the entire conversation had been paralyzed, focused on that, focused on the flow of information and what was or what wasn't. And so our goal, I thought, was to give us all a steady place to all stand on. Because if we do that, then we can turn forward to policy outcomes and put back on our policymaker hat and go forward. We've talked about some of those policies here today related to gun safety. I think school security is another lane that we're going to have to talk about. And obviously the police response and how an event like this should unfold. If it happens again, we should really be working to make sure it doesn't. Knowing that it might, we should be focused on how multiple agencies can work much better together, because that was a collapse in this environment. That's I think that was the important work that we did, was to give ourselves kind of steady footing to move forward into those next stages. And you've seen it in action in the package. You saw the work at the school board locally, You've seen an investigation at DPS begin into their officers' actions, and an investigation at Uvalde PD into their officers' actions. Those are all things that have happened after our report has been released. And so my hope is that we have given everybody the ability to understand as much as humanly possible what happened, and now we can start to address it going forward.
Representative Moody, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for your work in finalizing this report and getting it out to the public. And we do encourage our viewers to read this report for themselves. You can actually find the full 77 pages on our website at kvia.com. Just search for the story. You can find it in the Xtra archives. And we also want to remember the victims we lost on that day. In the beginning of this report, there are eulogies for all 21 victims. You can also find those eulogies on our website on this story to see who we have lost. Tonight, we end with the faces of those who remember. Have a great night. Thank you.